I was born on a night when thunder tore the sky in half, and my mother screamed as if the earth itself was turning inside out. They held me in their hands, bloody and trembling, under the cold light of the moon. No one celebrated my birth. No one sang me lullabies. Only the wind whistled between the old boards of the shack, as if reminding me that my life was already pledged in debt. My name was Rosa. My mother gave me that name, hoping that at least a drop of beauty would remain in the land where nothing bloomed except pain. I grew up on a plantation in Georgia, where the sun was heavy like chains, and the earth smelled of sweat, blood, and fear. From morning till night we picked cotton, our fingers bled, but the work never stopped for a moment. I remember the smell of wet earth after the rain. I remember how my fingers clung to the rough stems, leaving tiny strips of skin on the thorns. My life was simple. In the morning, picking; in the afternoon, sorting; at night, the rustling of conversations that circled like prayers. Someone would recall distant shores across the ocean. Someone would dream of escape. I remained silent. I learned to listen. My mother left early. Fever took her when I was only 7 years old. That was the first time I understood that tears could be hidden behind a smile if the smile was empty. From then on, I slept alone on a tiny mat made of burlap, hugging a doll made of rags and straw. I named her Essie. Only she knew my dreams. One evening, when the sky turned the color of spilled wine, we were gathered by the barn. The master, Mr. Crawford, stood with his legs spread wide and shouted something about a new order. He commanded us to line up. I stood next to a boy named Sam. He was 1 year older than me, and I could see his hands trembling. That night, 3 were taken away, sold. We did not know where, just taken. Their faces were erased in the darkness, like chalk on a board. I whispered questions to myself, so that no one could hear. Why did God give us wings of dreams, only to clip them at the very beginning? Why is someone born in a house with lace curtains and someone in a shack with a roof full of holes? As I grew older, I was assigned to cook in the main house. It smelled different there. In Mistress Annabel's house, there was always the scent of vanilla, wax, and something heavy and spicy. My hands chopped vegetables, kneaded dough, cleaned up the scraps of white folks' lives, while my thoughts wandered far beyond those walls. Sometimes I found myself staring at the paintings in the hallway. One showed a forest, thick, dark, endless. I dreamed of walking into it and disappearing. There were evenings when Mistress Annabel asked me to comb her hair. She sat by the fireplace, and I quietly ran the comb through her light strands. Sometimes she told me about Paris, about balls, about beautiful dresses. I nodded and smiled, but inside I felt something strange, as if I was hearing fairy tales about a world that would never be mine. One night, I saw something I was supposed to forget. I was heading to the kitchen to fill a bucket with water when I heard screams. In the hall, Mr. Crawford was holding a young maid, Bessie, by the hair. He whispered something through gritted teeth, and she trembled like an aspen leaf. I froze in the darkness, my heart pounding so loudly it seemed it would betray me. I knew, if he noticed, it would be the end for both her and me. The next morning, Bessie was gone. They told us she had been sent to another house, but we knew the truth. We knew that on this land, the truth was not spoken aloud. I often looked up at the sky, trying to find answers there. I asked questions into the void. If the soul is eternal, why must it suffer here? Why does God stay silent when we are sold, when we are beaten, when we are broken? I heard no answers. Only the wind wandered among the cotton fields, as if it too was searching for lost souls. But even in the darkest nights, something inside me refused to extinguish completely. Maybe it was the memory of my mother. Maybe the soft whisper of the stars. Or maybe simply the stubbornness inherited from those who lived before me. I did not know. I only knew that I was still here. There were days when the sun felt like a giant furnace, roasting us alive. Skin cracked from the heat, lips burned, but we kept picking cotton as if the very spinning of the earth depended on it. If someone slowed down, the whip loomed over them. Its crack was sharper than any pain. It tore not just the body but the soul. I watched old Joseph, who knew all the songs of ancient Africa, collapse to his knees right in the field. He never rose again. The master ordered him to be buried at the edge of the plantation, without prayer, without a stone, as if he was nothing. But at night, while darkness hung over the plantation, we gathered at his grave. In whispers with trembling voices, we sang him a song about the home beyond the great ocean. There, the elders said, there were no chains, no pain, only the free wind and rivers that sang of freedom. In those moments, I felt that our hearts were bound by invisible threads. Something greater than fear and suffering held us together, as if every blow, every scar, was woven into an unseen cloth that we wrapped around our souls, so they would not freeze in this cold world. I often dreamed of a place where grass was not trampled by the overseer's boots, where songs could be sung aloud without ducking your head into your shoulders. I knew that maybe I would never reach that place, but the dream itself warmed me more than any fire. There was a man I almost never spoke of to anyone. His name was Eli. He worked in the stables. His eyes were the color of wet earth, and when he looked at me, it felt like someone finally saw not my body but my soul. Sometimes, when no one was watching, he would secretly hand me a piece of sweet potato or a small white flower picked by the river. One day he whispered in my ear, "One day we will get out of here. I promise." And I believed him, even though the voice of reason screamed that here, promises did not exist. Here, everything given could be taken away with one swing of the whip. That winter, disaster came. The weather was cruel. Cold seeped through walls, through bones. Trees stood like black ghosts, their bare branches thrust into the gray sky. Many slaves fell ill. The weak were not treated. They simply waited until they could no longer stand. Eli fell ill too. His cough sounded like the creaking of old boards on a frosty night. I secretly brought him water and stolen flatbreads, hiding them under rags. But the sickness took him faster than my hands could save him. He died smiling, as if, in his final moment, he saw that very place we had dreamed about. I sat beside his body until dawn. I held his hand until it grew cold, and I whispered to him words I could not say while he lived. "You were my light." When they took him away, I felt something inside me break, but it did not shatter completely. The fire inside me trembled, but it did not die out. I vowed to myself I would not allow him to be forgotten. I would remember his eyes, his laughter, his dreams, even if everything else was taken away. Life went on, day after day, year after year. We laughed when we could and cried when no one was watching. We composed songs without words, told stories without beginnings or ends. We left traces on this earth, even if it tried to erase them. Sometimes at night, when mist rose over the fields, I saw shadows. They moved, whispered, called out. Maybe it was just my dreams bursting free. Or maybe it was the souls of those who had gone, returning to remind us we were here. We lived. We loved. Spring came quietly, like a thief creeping through the nights and morning mists. It seemed that everything around was afraid to bloom too loudly, as if the earth itself knew. Here, joy was dangerous. During those months, the plantation was shaken by changes. The master sold part of the land to a neighbor, and along with it, several families. I saw a mother spewing tears and prayers, trying to hold on to her children, clutching their clothes so tightly that her fingers turned white. But they pushed her away, roughly, coldly. The children were dragged off like cattle. Their screams hung in the air for a long time before dissolving, leaving emptiness behind. I stood aside, my hands clenched into fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. The pain from it was almost sweet, at least some pain that I could control. In those days I understood. The worst thing was not the whips, nor the cold eyes of the overseer. The worst thing was seeing the threads between hearts torn apart, seeing love turn out to be weaker than power. Sometimes it seemed to me that the whole world was a giant cage. Some cages were bigger, some were gilded, but all of us were imprisoned. And only in dreams did I feel the wind of freedom on my skin. One night I decided on a reckless act. I crept to the old river, where Eli once gathered flowers for me. The water was black and silent, like a forgotten grave. I stood there for a long time, looking at my reflection. It seemed to me that if I jumped, the river would carry me away to where there was no more pain. But I did not jump. I remembered Essie, my straw doll, hidden under an old board in the shack. I remembered my mother's hands holding me on that very first night. I remembered Eli's dying whisper. And I realized my life does not belong to Mr. Crawford, nor to fear. My life is my memories, my dreams, my fight. At dawn I returned to the shack, soaked to the bone, frozen, but alive. And a few weeks later a stranger appeared. A man with eyes the color of the night sky. He came under the guise of a trader, but at night spoke in whispers with our elders. He told of trails in the forest, of secret signs carved into trees, of people who helped others escape, of a road to the north. The Underground Railroad, they called it, a road without maps, but with faith. That night, our shack was filled with a silence so thick that you could hear hearts trembling. We knew, if we were caught, it would be the end. But we also knew, to stay was to die slowly. Many refused. It hurt too much to hope, when hope had so often turned into a trap. But I decided to go. I did not sleep that night. I looked at my hand, black and calloused, and thought, in these hands lies my destiny. No guarantees. Only the road. Only the sky above. Only faith, thinner than breath, but stronger than chains. I wrapped a little cornbread in a cloth, took Essie, my rag doll, my only treasure, and hid her in my bosom. And then, in the darkest part of the night, we set out. The grass was cold under our bare feet. The forest breathed around us, rustling its leaves, hiding us in its shadows. We walked silently. A step, another step. My heart hammered in my chest like a drum. Sometimes it seemed that at any moment we would hear the barking of dogs, that torches would flare, that we would be caught, thrown to the ground, beaten until nothing living remained. But the night protected us, and for the first time in many years, I felt, truly felt, that I was moving. Not where they drove me, but where my heart led. I walked following the shadows, the whisper of the wind, the memories of those who had died without ever taking a single step toward freedom. The night stretched into an endless road. The moon hung high, like a silent witness to our escape, sometimes hiding behind torn patches of clouds. We walked by feel, relying on signs that only those who knew this language could understand. Broken branches, stones laid in strange shapes, scratches on tree bark. I felt fear crawling over my skin like a cold snake. Every rustle, every crackle in the bushes made my heart contract. Sometimes it seemed as if the earth itself wanted to betray us, creaking underfoot, crunching twigs, whispering about us in the night. Old men with stiff joints walked, mothers with babies walked, teenagers whose eyes were too old for their years walked. No one complained, only breathing and footsteps. Heavy, stubborn, like life itself. One dawn we found shelter, an abandoned chapel, overgrown with moss and thyme. We huddled there, packed together, like chicks under a mother's wing. I sat pressed against the wall, feeling the cold stone through my back. In my hands, I clutched the rag doll Essie, as if her frail little body could protect me from everything in the world. When morning came, a man entered the chapel, tall, with a gray beard and eyes full of sorrow. He said nothing. He simply nodded and handed me a piece of bread and a flask of water. Sometimes help came just like that, without words, without promises. Only gestures, only eyes, only the silent understanding. You are not alone. We walked for many more nights. There was a moment when I thought I could not endure. The rain lashed us like a whip. My legs trembled from exhaustion, my eyes clouded by a fog of pain and despair. I fell to my knees in the mud and whispered through tears, "Lord, if you see me, somehow send me a sign." And then I heard it, a song, soft as a sigh, old as pain itself. A woman's voice singing something about a river, about home, about freedom. I lifted my head and saw a woman. She stood at the edge of the field, cloaked by the shadows of the trees. Her face was hidden by a scarf, but in her posture there was something ancient and unbroken. She waved to us and disappeared into the thickets. We followed her, through the forest, through the mud, through the fear. And when the sun rose again, a road opened before us. Long, straight, stretching into the distance. There, beyond it, were people, white and black. They stood with wagons, with blankets, with food in their hands. They smiled at us. We had made it. I fell to my knees, and for the first time in many years cried out loud. Not from fear, not from pain, from something else. From the river inside me that had finally broken free after a lifetime of holding it back. And yet, freedom, it was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning, because on free land awaited other trials, other chains, not on our hands, but on our hearts. People looked at us as if we were shadows, reminders of something uncomfortable, sometimes with pity, sometimes with contempt, rarely with understanding. I began to learn to live anew. I found work in a laundry. I washed other people's clothes just as I used to scrub the floors in Mistress Annabel's house. Only now it was my job, my choice. I rented a tiny room under the roof of a rickety house. Through the cracks in the roof, the light of the stars seeped in, and sometimes I fell asleep under their silent, cold gleam, holding the rag doll, Essie, close to me. I lived. I was. And sometimes, in the quietest hour before dawn, I heard Eli's voice. Not loud, not insistent. A whisper. "You found the way, Rosa. Now keep going." And I walked. Freedom smelled different than I had imagined. There was no sweet aroma of flowers or fresh bread. It smelled of dusty streets, the sweat of hard labor, loneliness, and the wind that wandered between houses, finding no shelter. I often sat on the porch of the laundry after a long day, my feet resting on the step, watching the sun slowly sink behind the rooftops. In my hands, I twisted a scrap of rope, a habit left over from those days when my hands instinctively searched for something to hold on to, something to keep from drowning in the emptiness. Sometimes white ladies in lacy hats would pass by. They would turn their eyes away, as if I were a stain on their morning air. Sometimes children threw pebbles at me, laughing. I did not get angry. I looked at them and thought about the chains that could not be seen. Because freedom, as I came to understand, was not just escaping those who held your body. True freedom was a long, hard journey out of the cages built inside you. Cages of fear. Cages of shame, cages where your own pain whispers to you, you are not meant to want more. There were nights when I woke up in a cold sweat, hearing in a fever dream the barking of dogs, the stomp of boots, the crack of a whip. Then I would light a tiny candle by my bed, hold Essie in my arms, and whisper to myself, "You are here. You made it out. You are breathing." And still, there were scars left on the heart, like old roads overgrown with grass, yet still leading somewhere deep. I found friends among my own, those who had also fled, those who were also learning to live anew. We gathered at the house of an old woman named Mabel. Her little kitchen always smelled of cornmeal porridge and milky soap. Mabel would say, "Do not be ashamed of your scars, child. They are the map of how you got free." I listened to her, and in those moments it seemed that time stood still, giving us a chance simply to be, without fear, without pain, without guilt. But even among our own, there were wounds that were hard to heal. Someone would remember loved ones sold far away. Someone would weep for children they would never see again. And someone like me would hold their pains silently, giving it no name, because we knew, if you name it, it would come alive, and you would collapse again under its weight. I wrote my thoughts on scraps of paper. I learned from an old woman who knew the letters. She told me that if you can write, you can pray even when your tongue can no longer form the words. I wrote about my mother, about Eli, about the land where grass grows free, about the river that calls to those who have forgotten how to sing, and about myself, about the girl born under a torn sky, and about the woman who, despite everything, still knew how to dream. Years passed. My voice grew stronger. My steps grew steadier. But inside, I still remained the same Rosa who once stood at the edge of the river, ready to vanish, and yet chose to go on. I began to help others, those who had just reached the north, those who trembled from fear, from cold, from uncertainty. I would touch their shoulders gently, offer them bread, whisper to them, "You are not alone. I walk this road too, and I am here, so you will make it too." There were days when it seemed the world was changing too slowly, that no matter how many songs were sung about freedom, too many still could not hear them. But then I remembered my mother's eyes, Eli's whisper, the scent of the wind over the cotton fields. And I knew every heart that made it out of chains, even if it was broken, was a small victory over the darkness. And I kept walking. Sometimes, sitting by the window of my small room, I thought about the path I had traveled. I remembered that night when I first saw the world from the outside, not through the eyes of a slave, but through the eyes of a living person who had the right to choose. I remembered the river, the forests, the black fields under the stars, the hands reaching out in the darkness to each other, afraid to lose the last hope. All of it remained within me, like old scars that no longer hurt, but never let you forget who you were and who you became. I was not a hero. I was not a legend. I was a woman with calloused hands, with a simple dream, to be, to love, to live without fear. Sometimes I caught myself smiling at strangers on the street. Sometimes they smiled back. Sometimes they did not. But I smiled anyway, because in that was my quiet victory. I no longer hid my light. One day, a little girl came up to me, black as coal, with braids sticking out in all directions. She looked up at me and asked, "Were you really once a slave?" I knelt down to be at her level and answered, "I was, but I always remained myself." She frowned thoughtfully, then suddenly asked, "Does it hurt to be yourself?" I was silent for a long time. I looked into her clear eyes, where there was no fear yet, but already a thirst for truth. "Sometimes," I finally said, "it hurts very much, but the pain passes, and you remain." The girl nodded, as if she understood more than she could say. In the evenings, I would go outside and look at the stars. The same stars under which my mother once prayed. The same stars under which Eli whispered in my ear. The same stars under which old men, mothers, and children walked through the forest, having lost everything, but not themselves. And it seemed to me that somewhere out there, beyond that cold light, there is a place where our voices merge into one song. A song about the road, about pain, about victory. Not a loud one, not a triumphant one, but one as quiet as breathing on a winter's night. One day, when my body grew heavy and my hair turned completely white, I sewed a new dress for myself. Simple white, like the clothes we imagined in our dreams of freedom. I put it on and stepped outside, feeling the wind playing with the folds of the fabric. I walked barefoot on the grass, feeling the earth breathing beneath my feet. And suddenly I realized I was no longer afraid. Not of whips, not of the cold, not of loneliness, because within me lived those I had loved. Within me lived those who had gone before. Within me lived that little Rosa, born on the night when the sky cried out in pain. I had made it. I became a river that continues to flow, even if no one sees it. I became a song that lives in those still searching for the way. I became a light that cannot be extinguished by fear or death. And if someone someday hears this whisper through time, if in the darkest night they catch a faint call, let them know it is not the wind, it is us, those who walked through the darkness, those who chose to go on, those who, despite everything, remained themselves.